So we're going to go through this question here. And remember, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what our implied domain is, and then also stating what the range is. So here we've been given a square root graph. And again, it's really important that you can just look at this and recognize that it's a square root graph. Square root graph. What gives it away is the square root. All right. We also need to remember the key features of this type of graph. So the key features of a square root graph is that it has an endpoint. Remember, we spoke about how to find this endpoint. We take what's underneath the square root, so in this case, 4 minus x, you set it equal to 0, and then you solve for x. So this is going to be negative x is equal to negative 4, x is going to be equal to 4. So that means I'm over here at 4. Then you also have to look at this 1 here. This means it's been shifted up one spot. So it's going to move up here. It's going to look like that. That is my endpoint at 4, 1. We also need to look at this negative in front of the x. This negative in front of the x is telling me that it's going this way. So remember, usually, well, not usually, but if there wasn't a negative in front of the x, it would be going this way. But because there is, we reflect it in the y-axis. So this is what the graph is going to look like. All right, so once we've done that, we can just by looking at this, figure out what my domain and range is going to be. So what is my domain going to be? Well, it's going to be, and let's make sure this is correct, negative infinity, because it's all of this, and then it's going to stop at 4. And I'm including that 4, so I put a square bracket. So negative infinity to 4. My range is going to be what? Well, my range starts, remember it's all my possible y values, it starts at 1, doesn't it? And then this thing, it just keeps going up. Like it's slowly going up, but slowly but surely, it just goes up and up and up for infinity. So if I can get rid of this line now, it's going to be that. So my range is going to start at 1 and go all the way to infinity. Because remember, you're looking at the possible y values. So there you go right there. I want to actually finish off this example by going through one more thing. But hopefully you can see by sketching this thing, we can identify what my domain and range is going to be. But let's for a moment talk more about this implied domain and how else we could think about it. I know that for a square root graph, I can't square root a negative number, right? So if I took what's underneath my square root here, 4 minus x, and said, well, I know that this thing right here has to be greater than or equal to 0. It has to be. By definition, you can't square root a negative number. If I then was to solve this for x, I'm going to end up with negative x is less than or equal to, or is greater than or equal to negative 4. Then I would times both sides by negative 1 to get rid of the negative here. And remember, when you do that, that flips the inequality. So I'm going to get x, I'll zoom in here. I'm going to get x, and I'm going to flip this inequality now. I'm going to get x is less than or equal to 4. And do you see how this is the same thing here? This is negative infinity to 4. That's the same as x is less than or equal to 4. So another way you could have figured out the implied domain is just thinking very algebraically about, well, if I have a square root, I know that by definition, what is underneath that has to be greater than or equal to 0, and then you can figure it out that way as well. So it's always important that you're thinking these things through in multiple different ways. Hopefully you have a good understanding now of maximal/implied domains.